Texas has become an incredibly exciting place politically for a couple of different reasons. The first is in the very short term, how things are looking for the presidential election. Obviously, things can change, but if you look at recent polls there, I know that you probably can't read the specifics. It's a lot of different polls over the course of the past 2 months or so, with, look, a number saying that Donald Trump is up, if not by as much as has happened in past presidential elections, but others showing that Joe Biden is up, including the UT Tyler poll showing him up by 5 points. So the sort of talk that's been going on for 15 or more years about Texas potentially being in play at some point may be the case this time around. But just because the people are changing, the numbers are changing, the polls are changing, doesn't mean that the GOP is going to take this thing lying down. Take a look at this from Ken Herman of the Austin American-Statesman. Cites a part of the proposed Texas GOP platform plank saying, State Electoral College, be it resolved that the state legislature shall cause to be enacted a state constitutional amendment creating an electoral college consisting of electors selected by the popular votes cast within each individual state senatorial district, who shall then elect all statewide office holders. So just as Texas is potentially flipping so that you can win statewide as a Democrat, and Democratic presidential candidates can potentially win there, suddenly, the popular vote, I don't know about that. Maybe we need to set up something that's going to dilute that in a number of different ways, which we'll discuss.
Yes, they are giving themselves a roadmap to meticulously do to Texas something that had been done. The only reason the Electoral College is legal is because it's explicitly in the Constitution. Every other device like that that's not in a Constitution, Mississippi's the only one that, I'm pretty sure Mississippi is the only one that has something like this explicitly in their state constitution. But the Supreme Court has said this kind of thing is explicitly not allowed by the Constitution unless it's explicitly mentioned in a constitution, and it's not. And that's why they're trying to amend the state constitution to get that to happen. But I don't think you can add stuff anymore like this. This is an attempt because they see in the last Gore-Trump elections that the Republicans lost the popular vote, but won the Electoral College in a way that warps democracy. And when they try to say what America is a proud blank, they say a proud democracy. But when the people's voice isn't heard, they have a really tough time backing that up. And this crazy, insane, long sentence is exactly how they're trying to go about doing it.
Exactly. I'll have a little bit more on the likelihood that it might, stick around if they do pass it. But just really fast in general, why would this matter? So you take a look at that and you think, okay, well, if each each state senatorial district decides and then we distribute those, does that really affect the outcome in a predictable way? And the thing is that yes, it does. Now, in this case with Texas, not necessarily in the same way that it has in some other cases that have been struck down by the Supreme Court. There was, I think, Oklahoma a few decades ago. They had a system like this with massive differences in the populations between state senatorial districts, so that it was effectively there were rural counties that counted for 3 times as much as the more urban counties. That is a consideration here, but it's also, if you understand how gerrymandered Texas is, you can fit tons of one party's voters in particular state Senate districts and then dilute, or I guess concentrate them there so that way more districts have less of that party. And so overall, it's a way to warp. I can see you wanting to jump in.
No, for sure. It is absolutely that. Like in history, just like not the ones you've listed, but throughout history, the things that have been voided by courts, you're saying 3-1, like 40-1. They pack 40 times more people into one district than another and just go, it's fine.
Yeah, the only reason I point out is that I think that in Texas with the state Senate districts right now, I think it is relatively similar total population-wise, based on the research I found. But I want to make clear that people know that that's not the only way to manipulate things.
Yeah, it is extraordinarily rough. It is extraordinarily unfair. And the thing is, like, for them, gerrymandering isn't enough. That's how desperate they are. Just gerrymandering isn't enough anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, and think about it. Like, well, oh God, things are changing. Man, we've always been able to rely on Texas, and maybe we won't. What can we do? I mean, hypothetically, we could, try to adopt some positions that Texans would like. nah, why don't we just totally change the way elections happen and take us another big step away from a real representative democracy? Let's do that. And that's what they're choosing. Hypothetically, it hasn't yet been put in the platform or as a plank in the platform. And even if it does, that doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be voted on, but it could. Now, what if they do? Well, as Brett pointed out, Mississippians could potentially strike down their version of this in November, but we know that the Supreme Court, which hypothetically this could go to at some point, recently, just this week, left in place a lower court order that likely will prevent hundreds of thousands of ex-felons in Florida from voting in the November election. It's the fourth time that the court has refused to intervene to protect voting rights just this year. You also have cases from Wisconsin, Alabama, and Texas where they overruled lower court decisions that sought to allow more absentee ballot voting. So just because it is extremely clear, the precedent, that this sort of thing is not constitutional, does not mean that the Supreme Court is actually going to continue to follow that precedent. They could very well overthrow it. If you have 5 partisan justices who believe that a Republican can't win a presidential election if Texas goes for the Democrats, are they going to hold to some court case from a few decades ago? Maybe, but maybe not.
Yeah, it's the more you hear about that Florida case, the more frustrating it gets, because that was a voter referendum. Mm-hmm. So the people who could vote, not counting the 800,000 whose votes would be added to the voter rolls, of the people who could vote for that, it was something like 66%. Like, it wasn't close. Everybody, like a super majority of voters said, no, I'm fine with this. I am fine with more people voting as long as they have, they get out of jail,
exactly,
or prison. And for a lot of these things, the more you read through it, they find some kind of technicality, and this still could go on. Like, them refusing to hear it doesn't mean that the fight is over, but it definitely delays the fight through November, as you mentioned.
Yeah. Okay, with that,
like 800,000 people could, very easily swing Florida. The idea that of the existing potential voters, Trump is having that hard a time in Florida shows how hard a time he's having now.
Exactly, yeah. And people should understand that, since we're talking about the Florida one, some people, the reason they decided to set up effectively a poll tax before these newly re-enfranchised but then disenfranchised felons can vote is, some people hear that and think, oh, well, yeah, I guess if they owe fees, they could just pay the fees. That seems reasonable enough. But the other reason that the Republicans chose this tactic is that they know that there is no centralized system to figure out what fees you owe or who you owe them to. So you can have potentially hundreds of thousands of ex-felons who are like, I want to pay my fines, but there is literally no way for me to do that. And the Republicans say, yeah, the system's complicated. It might take like 6 years to fix. We'll get around to it at some point. It's designed to make it impossible for them to vote. That's all it's there for. And the Supreme Court sees that. They get all of this evidence and they say, nope, we like what the GOP is doing in Florida. We're going to allow them to continue to stop those people from voting. And so that is why I'm very concerned about these sorts of things becoming more common. In Texas, sure, but potentially in other places as well. We've seen that when Republicans lose, for instance, governor seats, but they still have the legislature, or they're about to lose the legislature, they just strip away the powers before they go. And so the assault against democracy is coming in many different forms, and it's only going to get hotter as they become more and more unpopular nationally.
Yep.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.